Hello and welcome to the Hoop Collective podcast. We talk about the NBA, which we're doing on Tuesday evening. Joining me from the Barclays Center, where he's about to watch the Denver Nuggets play the Brooklyn Nets on the back-to-back for the Nuggets after an overtime win in Toronto. That should be interesting to see how that plays out. Tim Bontemps.
Yeah, on Sunday we thought the Bucks were going to cruise to a win over the Nets, and they did not. And we'll see if the Nuggets can go to 2-2 or not.
Yeah, it would be, not only is it convincing to see whether they can win, it's going to be interesting to see whether they can win when Jokic doesn't have to carry the entire load, because he scored 40 points in 2 of their first 3 games so far.
And he scored 40 in 3 games all of last season. So
that says a lot. Joining us from Minneapolis, Minnesota, where he's there to see the Wolves play the Mavericks and these same Nuggets. We're going to be all over the Nuggets this week. I'm sure they're very excited. Is Ben MacMahon.
Howdy, partners. Old Mavs coming out on a back-to-back, but I tell you, Luka Doncic, some wise strategy. He decided to save all of his buckets for the back end after going 5 of 22 in that one over the Jazz.
I am going to wager that Luka will come back around on that.
He seems to enjoy playing in this building, but we'll see how it goes.
Yes, he does. He definitely was enjoying a back and forth with the fans in the West Finals there last year, where he took them out in Game 5. All right, MacMahon, you have a story coming out that has an interesting concept to it. Why don't you tell everybody about it?
Yeah, the quick gist of the story is there's this modern archetype of big man that really began with Brook Lopez, the elite rim protector who's a floor spacer, who's a three-point gunner. And then you've got these 2 dudes just coming along that are completely blowing the top off this new archetype. And I'm talking about 2 dudes that you've discovered, Wendy. 2 guys who are playing.
Nobody had ever heard of them. Thank goodness for Gavoni relies on me.
Yes.
Jonathan Gavoni would not know about these 2 guys had I not told him.
And we're talking about Victor Wembanyama and Chet Holmgren playing against each other on our network Wednesday night.
What a good company, man.
It's always got to get that 401k looking good, baby. It is always a show when those guys play each other. Matter of fact, one of the scenes I referenced is the last time that they played each other. And this is just, it just shows like how much the game has changed really in the last decade, 5 years even. And then just these guys are doing things that are completely insane. But they played each other last year, February 29th. Victor swoops in. He didn't get the block, but got a great contest on Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, forces a miss at the rim, grabs the rebound, throws an outlet pass, takes about a dozen strides up the court, gets the ball back on the logo. And what's he do? As any 7'4" guy, 7'4" traditional big man would do, he let that thing fly from the logo in crunch time and swish. And like I said, that's kind of what he does. Chet doesn't necessarily have that type of range, but he certainly lets it fly. And then what's scary about them, and I think what differentiates them from a Brook Lopez, certainly even a Kristaps Porzingis, these guys are remarkable athletes who can put the ball on the floor, they're elite lob threats. They can score in so many different ways. And I tell you, like we've obviously talked about Victor a ton, talked about, how soon is he going to be the best player in the league, all those kind of things. And I think it's kind of assumed Victor's a generational talent and Chet's going to be really good. Chet's probably going to be better than really good. He is off to an unbelievable start this season.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about Chet the other day, just sort of in passing. At the beginning of the season, I don't remember what the numbers are. Maybe Jackson can look them up for us. But Victor was the ESPN bet favorite for most improved player, which I'm with Bontemps with this. Like, I don't think I felt strongly about this before I got to know Bontemps. This is one of the few things he's brought me around on. He also got me to switch airline allegiance. I think the 2 things he brought me around on most, MacMahon, is not voting for guys in their second year for most improved.
Okay.
And he got me to switch airline allegiance. That's after that. I'm not sure there's been any benefit to knowing him. I'm going to have to think about that. But I agree with that. However, I have to mull this over because Chet Holmgren potentially is going to challenge.
Chet's in his second year.
He's in the third year of his rookie deal.
He's in his second year for this kind of stuff.
I don't know.
I don't. Yeah, I need a ruling. I need a ruling on this, and I'm not necessarily sure you get to adjudicate it.
Well, I'm just going by the way. If you just said that if you go by my thing, he was eligible for rookie of the year last year, so he's a sophomore this year. I'm not going to be voting for him for most improved player personally. Doesn't mean everybody's got to listen to me, but I won't be voting for him.
But whether you want to consider him a candidate for that particular award or not, the guy had a phenomenal rookie season. Would have been rookie of the year in the vast majority of seasons.
Sure,
he's not going to be pitted against this alien, and like he has come back. And it looks like he's making a significant leap. He's guys, and again, we can small sample size, whatever. Dude's averaging 13 rebounds. He has been a spectacular finisher. Defensively, he's gone from awesome to awesomer, if that's a word. Honestly, the one thing he hasn't done well, and it's a 3-game sample size, he shot the ball well from the perimeter in the third game. Before that, he was 0 for 10. And he's still averaging almost 24 points on extremely efficient fashion.
Well, the thing about it is, it's only been 3 games, so whatever. But in theory, he should only benefit from getting to play power forward later this year. I know that he played center 82 games last year. I know he's playing center now. I was just talking to a veteran executive just a couple of days ago who said, platitudes about Chet. He's like, I like everything about him, and I also think he's a power forward. So it's possible, he gets to spend time with power forward, his case will improve. By the way, Jackson looked it up for us. Chet's right now 10th in ESPN bet for most improved.
Yeah, it's higher than that in Defensive Player of the Year.
Well, and if you look at Oklahoma City, they're off to a great start, and they're shooting 27% from 3 as a team. So obviously, there's some still upward mobility for them from that standpoint. And look, like going back to last year, there were a lot of comments, and this is with no disrespect to Jalen Williams, that Jalen Williams is the second best player on the Thunder. And I think, again, no disrespect to Jalen Williams, if the Thunder are going to be the team that everybody thinks they can be, then I think it's because Chet Holmgren is pretty clearly their second best player. Because if you look at his combination of physical tools, he may not be quite what Victor is, but he's in the same realm. And when you have a guy at that size who can space the floor, who can guard multiple positions defensively, who can handle the ball and do all the stuff he can do, it's a total game changer for your team. And it's what made him such an intriguing prospect along with Victor to begin with. And while that exec may have a point about Chet being able to play power forward, this goes back to the conversation we've had since last September. The fact that Chet is able to be a full-time center who can play some power forward, that is a truly game-breaking thing, because you look at the elite teams now, when you have these guys who can be an offensive threat as a spacer at the center position and play defensively at the other end, which we'll get to some stuff with the Knicks later about that part of it. Those are the teams, when you have that kind of piece, whether it's Kristaps Porzingis or Chet Holmgren or potentially Victor, those are the guys that can really break the mold for what teams are trying to do. And it's what makes the Thunder such a dangerous group.
Yeah, and look, it's one of the things that vaulted the Bucks into contender status. A lot of people look at, J. Kidd got fired and Bud came in. Well, when Bud came in, they got a bargain deal on Brook Lopez, and that's when they made the jump from, I think a 44-win team to a 60-win team. And, talking to Brook Lopez.
Totally revitalized Brook Lopez's career, too, as a guy who's in Barclays Center, where Brook spent the first half of his career and was seen as a offense first guy that didn't really guard anybody, even though he was massive. And back half of his career, he's become this bomber 3-point shooter who's seen as one of the best rim protectors in the league.
Yeah, and what he was able to do was impact the most important real estate on the floor on both ends, right? Talking about the paint, shut it down defensively and open it up offensively. And, this is a guy he's the Brooklyn Nets all-time leading scorer. And until the last year that he was there, he didn't shoot threes. He shot 24 threes in his first 3 years. First year in Milwaukee, he ended up shooting 512. But he, on a lot of possessions, what's he doing? He's standing 3 feet beyond the three-point line out on a wing. And as he said, he's just standing there and watching. And it took him a little bit to realize as he put it, he impacts the game offensively a lot of times by doing nothing. Now, what's scary, really scary about Chet and Wemby is they can do that, and then they can be the focal points as well.
Well, speaking of Wemby, he's off to a bit of a slow start. He's battling an illness right now. 3 games. He's only had one double-digit rebound game. Now, he had 20 rebounds in that game, so his rebounding numbers look good. But as we talked about, and this is Bontemps' big thing, and again, I don't disagree with him on this, it's all about the outside shooting, and his outside shooting he's off to a rough start. He has not yet demonstrated that that's something he can rely on. He was a little bit better after the All-Star break last year, but so far on jump shots, he's just not getting it done. He's shooting 22% on threes. He's shooting 29% on shots from 15 to the 3-point line, mid-range shots, and he's taking. He's not taking a ton of them, but he's taking
taking 6 threes a game.
Shot selection it's an interesting issue for Wemby because the Spurs don't necessarily want to put any limits on him, and they want to allow him to kind of experiment and see what he can do. But like you look at the when they beat the Rockets, the 2 threes he hit, one was he's the ball handler in a pick and roll that started at half court, and he had a foot on the logo when he launched it. The other, he's isoing from the top of the arc, goes between his legs and launches a 3. I mean, the guy, Chet at this point, as far as his 3-point shooting, is a much more traditional catch and shoot guy, where Wemby lets him fly in all sorts of manners.
Well, there's 2 things I'll say to that. One, Victor shooting 88% from the line on over 5 attempts per game. So even though I've been critical of his shooting, I've also said the whole time, he does not have a broken jumper.
No, it's pretty.
His shot will be just fine in time, especially when he cleans up his what shots he's taking. And while this is not great for somebody's bet on the over on the Spurs, it is not a bad thing, I think, for the Spurs on any level to just have Victor do whatever he wants on offense this year, because as we've said a lot, if the Spurs lose this bet for you and they're in the low 30s in wins or lower, and they get another crack at the top of this draft, and by the way, they have the Atlanta Hawks pick. They just lost to the Washington Wizards on Monday. They're off to a bit of a slow start. If they get a crack or two at a high pick in this draft and get a Cooper Flagg or a VJ Edgecombe or Nolan Traore or one of these dudes to go with Stephon Castle.
Kids, yeah.
Right, either Ace Bailey or Dylan Harper, to go with Stephon Castle, who's playing a lot and looks interesting, to obviously go with Victor, to go with Devin Vassell, who got assigned to the G League with the Austin Spurs for training camp to come back from this foot surgery he had. It ain't going to be a bad thing for the Spurs if they get another rough season and another high pick or 2 and more young talent to go with this guy. So yes, I certainly am the first to say that he needs to clean up the shot selection over time, but for the next 6 months, exploring the studio space might not be the best thing for you, MacMahon, but it'll be a pretty good thing. I think.
What's your favorite fast food restaurant?
Paolo Banchero. How about Paolo Banchero, number 1 overall pick in 2022, is gonna, could be the next number 1 overall pick to get a giant contract coming up after we've seen a number in a row get them. And he had his first career 50-point game on Monday night against the Pacers. The Pacers gave up 45 to Tyrese Maxey, Bontemps? Although that
they
was
gave
up
overtime. 38 in the second half in overtime, I believe, of Sunday's game, and they gave up 37 to Paolo in the first half of Monday's game. That's a total of 75 points in a 53-minute span. That's not ideal.
Yeah, the Magic off to a very good start, 3-1. Banchero's averaging 29 points, although obviously increased by the 50-pointer. But I think more impressively, 13 free throws a game on average over the first 4 games.
Yeah, and his assists are up significantly. I think they're at 6 per game. His turnovers are down to less
than 9 rebounds a game.
Yeah, turnovers down under 2 per game. And the questions with Paolo Banchero coming into the draft, obviously the guy's 6'10", 250, extremely athletic. a lot of skill. I think the biggest questions were, how is he going to fare defensively? And could he ever become an efficient go-to guy? Well, defensively, I'm not saying he's the reason why, but he is part of an elite defense in the NBA. The Magic last year were one of the best defenses in the NBA. That does not happen unless your best player is buying in and doing his part. And then, the last couple of years, he's scored, but the efficiency has needed to improve, which is the case with a lot of young guys. I'm about to go watch Anthony Edwards play. That's a guy whose efficiency has gone from not very good to better and better and better. We're only a week into the season, but Paolo's rim attempts are up significantly. His threes are up significantly, and you just mentioned the free throws being up significantly. If you're looking to be more efficient, those are the three areas to get. And look, it's easy to say, but then that's what every defense is trying to take away, right? Go shoot layups, free throws, and threes. Yeah, it's easy to say, hard to do. I checked in with Jamal Mosley, and he's talking about his poise and his decisiveness have both really improved, and that has allowed him to bump up his efficiency. And you're talking about a young guy who really seems to understand everything that goes into being a face of the franchise. Jamal's raving about his leadership. He's was an all-star last year, and I think has a chance to get himself into some loftier conversations this year.
Well, also part of the Magic's early season, and by the way, Franz Wagner, he's been battling an illness. He didn't even play the second half that game against Indiana. But Jalen Suggs, who got that big $150 million deal last week, Jalen Suggs is off to a great start. Now, all small sample size, etc., but he's averaging 17 points so far. And this is obviously a team that very badly needed outside shooting. Their big investment in the offseason was Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, who, by the way, is having one of the worst shooting starts to his career and in the league right now. He's shooting 12% from 3-point range for the first 4 games. No big deal, but he hasn't helped. Jalen Suggs, a guy who, when he came into the league, his outside shot was really questioned, and didn't shoot the ball well from 3-point range at all his first couple of years. Started turning the corner last year. He turned the corner last year just in general. That's why he got $150 million. He was all defense, and his 3-point shooting really improved. He's off to just a terrific start shooting the ball. He's taking 8 a game and so far shooting 45%. Now, I don't know if either of those are going to hold up, but Jalen Suggs' lift offensively alongside Paolo's development is one of the reasons the Magic are a team to be paid attention to. Bontemps, there's these teams in the East that are kind of off to rough starts. We'll talk about some of them. Milwaukee's off to a rough start. Philly doesn't have their guys. New York is sputtering just a little bit. Don't forget about the Magic, who are looking very good, especially offensively where they needed it.
Look, we've talked about this a lot, the depth of these young teams in the East behind the older, more, bigger market, bigger star teams that have sort of been focused on behind the Celtics, and how they could flip back and forth as the year goes along, depending on how those older teams look. And I mean, the Jalen Suggs thing is really important to talk about. When you go back to when he signed that extension last week, basically the dividing line on that extension in terms of whether you liked it or not is whether you believed in Jalen Suggs as a shooter. Last year, he shot 39.7% from 3, like you said, over 5 attempts a game. And first years of his career, he hovered around 30. And you see a guy have a jump in a year like that. The question is he going to maintain, or is it going to go back to where it was before? Obviously, I don't know if he's going to shoot 45% from 3 all year like he is now. But if he can stay around 40% with his defensive ability, where he's basically Alex Caruso at the defensive end with a little more juice with the ball and a better shooter, that's a guy who's worth $150 million over 5, especially as the cap's going up and with his contract ascending. So him shooting the ball like that is huge. And MacMahon makes a great point across the board on Paolo. He has really been a very inefficient player the first couple of years in the league, which is fine. He's a young guy. He's growing and developing. But for them to take the next step, you saw it in that playoff series against Cleveland. They couldn't get out of the mud offensively the whole series.
Oh my God.
And
they needed to progress to get to mud. What's stickier than mud? Because that's what they were in. That whole series, that game 7. Now look, it was a game 7 you always like to see game 7, but the Cavs and the Magic, again, they needed to get rid of what they were using to progress to a rock fight. They were, whatever
Yes.
was worse than a rock fight. They were throwing hubcaps at each other. They were throwing sewer lids at each other.
Yeah. So like, obviously a big part of that is Paolo taking a leap. Now, again, his usage right now is 36. That's probably not sustainable. But if he can be a guy who's around 30% usage, who is shooting in the high 40s from the field, who's hitting more threes, if he's getting to the line around 10 times a game, right now he's at 13, that's probably not going to last either. But if he's getting close to double-digit free throws, and at his size, the fact that he can bring the ball up and handle the way he can, like, he's obviously an incredibly dynamic player, and that efficiency is the thing that's going to separate whether he becomes a superstar or, a guy who's making multiple all-star teams. But for a young Magic team, they've got all these guys locked in long-term. Franz Wagner is hitting shots after not hitting any threes last year early on. There is a lot to be excited about. Like you said, we're going to talk about some of these teams that are struggling in the East. Orlando and Cleveland getting off the hot starts is going to immediately put pressure on the Knicks, the Bucks, the Sixers, the Pacers, these teams that thought they were going to be fighting for home court. A couple of those spots go to the Cavs and Magic. All of a sudden, the East standings look a lot different.
Well, and you talk about Suggs as this dominant defensive guard who developed as a three-point shooter, and you hope that can sustain. You know who hit a couple big threes and that went over the Pacers? 20-year-old Anthony Black, number 6 overall pick in last year's draft. Going into his second season, played some as a rookie, but they think this kid can be a smothering multi-positional defender. And, if he is a average to good three-point shooter, I mean, he's got a chance to really, really, really be a high-end role player. 6'7", skinny. He's all arms, legs, and hair. But with Franz out, he was playing crunch time minutes, and he hit a couple of big threes in that game.
Yeah, he hit the game-winning shot. I mean, it wasn't at the buzzer, but he hit the shot that put them ahead for good with 15 seconds to go. He got thrown the ball in the corner, I think by Paolo, was open, knocked down a shot with them tied, and won them the game. Like, that was a big moment. Like you said, with Franz out, like, that could be a game, that Magic Pacer game, that could be a game that determines seeding in a few months. Like, that was a really important game, and the Magic came out on top because of it.
All right, well, team on the other side, Jackson points out that Paolo gave Anthony Black a shout out. I'm sure Grady Dick, who's a big Anthony Black fan, I'm sure he gave him a text too, because those two guys had one of the iconic moments of last season. You can Google it. So on the other side of that, the game that Paolo put up 50 was against the Pacers. Now we can talk about the Pacers defense. Obviously,
so it only counts for 40. Is that what you're saying? Because it's the Pacers?
That's exactly not what I said. What I'm going to say is, while the Pacers defense is maligned, what if I told you that the Pacers are actually playing slightly better defensively in this small sample size than they did last regular season?
I'd say that's an awfully low bar to stumble over.
I understand, but my point is the reason why the Pacers are struggling right now is not their defense, although it's nothing to get excited about. Their offense has gotten out of the gates very slowly these first 4 games. They're scoring about 12 points per game fewer per 100 possessions than they did last year when they were the number 2 offensive team. All small sample size, et cetera, et cetera. We have to have that understanding. But they're literally slow. Their pace is slow.
And where does that start? Where does everything start with the Pacers?
Well, I'm going to give you just one Tyrese Halliburton stat. You could, and I'm sure Bontemps even has them, you could look at a bunch of different Halliburton stats. But I'm just going to tell you that Halliburton is playing about a minute more per game than he did last year, just on average. And last year, his minutes were held down because he was coming back from the injury and he was trying to limp to that 65 game number. Mm-hmm. He's averaging 6 fewer assists, actually more than that, 6.5 fewer assists a game than he did a year ago. I mean, you want to know where the 12 points are missing from? How about right there? 6 fewer assists from Tyrese Halliburton. And I mean, they're having issues across the board. Siakam's numbers are down a little bit, his 3-point shooting especially. But Bontemps, you talked about this right from the start. You were at a Pacers game last week.
Yeah, look, I mean, I saw Tyrese Halliburton last Friday against the Knicks, and watching the game, he just wasn't getting into the paint that much. He would kind of get inside the arc and look like he might have an opening to attack the basket, and then he would sort of kick it out to the perimeter instead. And it just didn't feel anything like the beginning of last season, when for the first couple months of the year, he might have been the most fun player to watch in the league. And they were flying up and down the court, and it was all him generating this crazy pace. And it just didn't feel the same way. Asked him after the game, he got asked about how he's feeling. Is there any lingering physical stuff? He said, no, I'm just missing shots. He obviously did start to hit some shots this weekend, but the Pacers, just for a team that has so many guys back and has so much continuity, it's been interesting to see them get off to kind of a rocky start and not seemingly have everybody pulling in the same direction and on the same page, and in terms of what they're trying to do. And, we have talked going back to last year about their overall defensive deficiencies across the board. And, I'll go back to this summer. They paid $60 million to re-sign Obi Toppin. I will never understand why, as a guy who's a backup 4 and doesn't play multiple positions, he's a part-time player for them. And you look at guys like Derek Jones Jr. and Najee Marshall, and like these guys who are rangy wings that could give them some more toughness on the wing and some.
Well, I just don't know who was offering the same. I mean, that's why I was confused by it. Is that who was the other offer?
That's what I mean. They paid him above the mid-level, and it put them in a bind for where they are financially. They couldn't go get another wing defender, which they really needed. And, their team is in a difficult spot. They're
in a difficult spot if Halliburton is going to play like this. I mean, but
they're in a difficult spot, I think, in terms of their overall ceiling, because their
defense. Forget their ceiling. To be a team that is a threat to get maybe even into the playoffs in the East, much less out of the first round again, Tyrese Halliburton has to be a star. Here's the most shocking stat about the Pacers right now. They rank 23rd in the league in pace as we speak. That was number 2 last year. And that is a Tyrese Halliburton stat, as much as the drop in points of 6 per game, the drop in assists from 6 per game.
Yeah, I mean, some of the points thing is him just missing open shots. That's going to change. He's missed a ton of wide open shots. I think he's going to hit more shots. But yeah, that's the thing that stands out. They just aren't playing with the same level of speed and urgency and pace that they did for so much of last year. And
Bontemps, you've been in Boston a couple times already this season. The Celtics are undefeated as we record this. They are playing the Pacers in a rematch of the Eastern Conference Finals from last season. The Eastern Conference Finals, that was, who knows what would have happened if Jaylen Brown didn't hit the shot in game 1. That's a battle cry, plus the Halliburton injury. That's a battle cry for the Pacers in the offseason. By the way, Joe Mazzulla, who is starting to rack up amazing quotes. Like we're on the second or third page of Joe Mazzulla career quotes. He was on a Boston radio station this week and said that in addition to the fact that there should be power plays, he's a big fan of proper football, soccer. And he thinks there should be power plays because he was talking about how in soccer they're going to start, in some leagues they're going to have a blue card where you sort of have to, not a yellow or red, a blue card where you get sent off for a few minutes and can come running in. He wants the NBA to be like that with like hockey, where you have, a matter of seconds that you can play with 4 guys. But he also thinks that fighting should be allowed in the NBA. He said that, in baseball, they let the dugouts and the bullpens empty, and in hockey, they allow fights. Why shouldn't there be fighting in basketball? And the thing about Joe is you've talked about, go ahead, MacMahon.
I want Adam Silver to be asked that question at the NBA Cup in Vegas when he does his State of the NBA.
Bontemps is the guy who asks Adam Silver the questions.
Joe Mazzulla had this great idea. Adam, what do you think of it?
Adam likes to answer questions. He starts out with saying, "As I said," which means he's probably said it not to the media, but behind the scenes. As I said, we can't allow our coaches to be fighting. You mentioned, MacMahon, you said that, maybe Mazzulla is calling for the coaches.
Yeah, no, I would call for that. I think it's a great idea. Look, I'm pretty sure Mazzulla would be all for that. We know what is it, Bontemps he's jujitsu and all that kind of training.
Yeah. Yeah.
So is Jamal Mosley, though. And I'm going to put Mosley at the top of my coach's power rankings because he's got coach's brawling power rankings. Also, the guy's done a heck of a job in Orlando. But I'm just telling you, he's got the reach. He's got the major reach advantage. And, when it's a taller guy and a wee little fella, I'm going to take the taller guy every single time. I tell you what, though, just backyard brawling, I wouldn't want to tangle with old Ime Udoka. Well, I don't know, man. He's got to be
a guy who doesn't look
too.
like doesn't look like he would lose too many fights. Ime Udoka.
He certainly doesn't think he would. I can promise you that.
I wouldn't want any part of Tibbs. I feel like he could grab onto your ankle like his mentor Jeff Van Gundy and not let go.
But I think he'd be more of a hip drop tackle guy, and they've outlawed that in the NFL. But he's got a little bit of a heft to him to do some damage.
Well, anyway, beyond that, Bontemps, the Celtics are really good, and they're getting a game. They're getting a shot at the Pacers on Wednesday.
I mean, the thing that sums up the start to the season for the Celtics is, well, two things. One, my buddy Jay King had a tweet last night that summed this up. Through 4 games, the Celtics have hit 86 3-pointers. In their 4 games, their opponents have hit 40. It is a 46 3-pointer difference. That is a 138-point difference.
I was going to say, I couldn't even do that math off the top of my head. It's so high.
It is a 34-point difference per game from the line.
My God.
That is unsurvivable as an opponent.
It is unsurvivable. On top of that,
they've got a 34-point edge just walking out onto the court. It's
and listen, and part of that is the Celtics this year are averaging 50 at threes a game. They're making 21 and a half, and they're shooting as a result 42.8% from 3 on 50 attempts a game.
I don't have these numbers in front of me. I'd be really interested to see how many of those are catch and shoot, because you think of the team, like the D'Antoni.
The answer, the unofficial answer is most of them.
Yeah, and it's I say that because you go back to D'Antoni's Houston Rockets, who at the time were just launching threes at a rate nobody had ever seen. A lot of those, though, were James Harden just dancing with the dribble and step back. And Tatum's got some of that. Tatum's got that sidestep too, but they move the ball so well, and they've got 5 guys out there almost at all times who are legitimate threats to knock down threes.
MacMahon, did you see what do they call a Pritchard? What do they call a buzzer beater from Pritchard? Isn't there a nickname?
I believe our guy Drew Carter has started calling it the Pritching Hour.
The Pritching
Hour.
Did you see? Good job, Drew. Did you see? I mean, you were in the building, but MacMahon, did you see Doc Rivers the other night when there was 7 seconds left in the quarter and Pritchard was in the game? And everybody and their brother knew that A, Pritchard was getting the ball, and that B, he was taking a shot at the buzzer. And he did get the ball, race up the court, and take a shot at the buzzer, and of course made it.
Mm-hmm.
Did you see Doc Rivers?
No, what did you? I missed this.
I mean, he was beyond incredulous.
So you remember, everybody remembers the iconic Steph buzzer beater in Oklahoma City when he pulled up from
bang, bang,
feet,
Mike
bang, bang. And the funniest thing is when you watch the replay from the right angle, is you've got old Ennis, the Stash brothers, Ennis at the time, Cantor, and Steven Adams at the end of the bench. And as Steph is starting to pull up, they're just hands on head, how could you let the guy pull up from 40? It's the same if the buzzer's running down with Pritchard. I don't care if he's 60 feet away. You cannot let him get a clean look.
Yeah.
And Doc Rivers was upset because he said they talked about that at shoot around in the morning, and specifically they didn't want him to get to the sideline because he likes to sort of get to the wing and get those shots off from wherever he gets them.
Which
to.
is exactly what he did.
Right. he got exactly to the kind of spot he wanted to get to. And I mean, look, the Celtics are off to an unbelievable start. Kristaps Porzingis has not played. Sam Hauser, who's an excellent shooter and very good player, has not played the last couple games. Mm-hmm. They didn't shoot the ball very well for a lot of the game against Milwaukee Monday night. Pritchard outshot the Bucks for basically the whole game, ended up shooting as many threes as they did the entire night. And
Wow.
I mean, there's been absolutely no hangover from these guys. They are locked in. They're playing great. Like there was one sequence in the game where Derek White hit threes on back-to-back possessions and in between blocked Giannis Antetokounmpo on a drive to the rim. Like
Yeah.
him and Drew Holiday have been making
But-
unbelievable. Like they're just totally
see,
locked in and in a
like
great
that
spot.
math, which is why Joe Mazzulla is crazy like a fox. He may say wild stuff, but his philosophy is well drilled into the players, and Brad Stevens has matched it exactly with what he's given him. And so it's funny to hear him say these things, but like they know exactly what they're doing, obviously. That was the second night of a back-to-back. Giannis and Dame both scored over 30 points. But because of the math problem that you illustrated, Bontemps, like it's a hard thing to overcome.
Well, that
Yes.
math problem and the math problem of Dame scores 30 and gives up 40. Like, let's just be honest. Peyton Pritchard is added to the long.
Yeah, but
long
everybody's
list.
given up those points to
Well, look,
Boston.
and Dame actually gave pretty good effort, you know, especially in the first couple quarters and three quarters of that game. I mean, the thing when you're playing the Celtics, though, is that they just are going to relentlessly attack these matchups, and they don't. I wouldn't say they have the most. To say they don't have the most sophisticated offense is the wrong way to put it, but they're really. Joe Mazzulla, I asked Joe Mazzulla before the game yesterday about the number of threes they're getting up. And he said, look, it's just a matter of we're trying to get 2-on-1 opportunities against the defense. And it's a matter of where those create shots. Maybe it creates layups, maybe it creates threes, maybe it creates jump, whatever. The goal is to get the defense at a 2-on-1 where you got one guy guarding two, and then you get an open shot and you take it. And when you watch this team play, they're moving the ball, they're sharing the ball, they're getting wide open shots. And as you said, MacMahon, other than Luke Cornett, every guy who steps on the court is capable of hitting threes. And as a result, they just put immense strain on the defenses that they're playing because it's at any point in the game, they can have a run where they hit 4 or 5 threes. Like the Bucks played well in this game. Second night of a back-to-back. You mentioned Giannis and Dame coming out with aggression and playing pretty well throughout. And the Celtics then go on a run at the start of the fourth quarter with a bunch of bench players in. They go on a 16-2 run and blow the game open. And it's Peyton Pritchard and Xavier Tillman and Jordan Walsh making plays. Jordan Walsh, who had the first.
Some of these guys are third stringers. Yeah, these are third stringers, fourth stringers.
He came in off the bench in the first real minutes of his whole NBA career and had a couple offensive rebounds, hit a shot, like made some really impactful plays for the Celtics. And I've said it a couple times, the way they are starting to create this program across the board, it really reminds me of the Spurs 10 and 12 and 14 years ago, where it doesn't matter who's playing. It doesn't matter what's going on. They run the same thing. They do the same stuff. They play together. They move the ball. They get open shots, and they're going to do the same things every night. And it's just really impressive to watch. And they're obviously off to an incredible start.
They have all that. They've got the system. They've got the style of play. They have the unselfishness, and they have legitimate stars, which obviously same thing with the Spurs. Like you can have the best system in the world. If you don't have stars, you know, you're not going to win 64 games in the championship.
Well, that's the thing that's important to mention about the shooting, because everybody's talking about the number of threes the Celtics are getting up and like, oh, is this breaking the sport? First of all, I really like watching this Celtics team. I don't think it's bad to watch them move the ball and get wide open shot after wide open shot. I'll also say a lot of teams could try to shoot 53s in a game. It wouldn't go well. Like the reason this is working is because the Celtics have built a team of excellent shooters and they're moving the ball and getting wide open shots and taking them. It's not because they're like, hey, we got to get 53s up today.
The Cavs have a couple of interesting games coming up this week. They had a really nice victory Monday night in Madison Square Garden to improve to 4-0 on the season, 3-0 on the road. Not the hardest schedule. Played in Toronto and Washington. Still 3-0 is 3-0 on the road. Host the Lakers on Wednesday, and then on Friday host the Magic on ESPN. A little early season Magic Cavs national TV action, and appropriately so, quite frankly.
Yeah. Get them off NBA TV.
And something interesting that is happening with this Cavs team, two things. One, Evan Mobley averaged 2-point-something drives per game last year. Sometimes he didn't even want the ball. Sometimes when he got the ball, he acted like it was a hot potato and moved it along. 4 games into the season, he's averaging over 9 drives a game. Now,
Wow.
small sample size, but if you watch Evan
Oh.
Mobley, his attack mentality is night and day. Secondly, last year, I don't know what Darius Garland played like last year, but it wasn't a max player. He had this terrible broken jaw, couldn't eat, lost weight. Not only is Darius Garland looking like a completely different player, like the All-Star he was 2 years ago, Donovan Mitchell is yielding to him. Now, I'm not saying he's going to do that every single night, but here they were in Madison Square Garden on Monday. This is Donovan Mitchell's hometown. This is his big game, and he still put his imprint on the game, but he got out of the way. He knew that Garland was cooking, and he let Garland go. He's given up some of his usage to let Evan Mobley be more involved in the offense, and Mobley is reacting by taking the ball and being very aggressive with it. This is what Kenny Atkinson is trying to get going. Whether or not it keeps up, obviously, is a different matter. But the Cavs can elevate their offense by getting more out of the guys that they have. So far, that's happening, and they're 4-0.
No question. I mean, this is what, like you said, they hired Kenny Atkinson to change the offense, to change the usage of these guys, and to increase their ceiling. And so far, it's very early, but so far it looks like that's been the case. As we've talked about a bunch, they've got this really interesting stretch of games coming up against really good teams, and we'll see where they sit in a couple of weeks. And I think the other interesting thing from that game last night is what's going on with the Knicks offense. Now, it's only 3 games, and the Knicks are currently 3rd in the league in offensive efficiency. So I'm sure Knicks fans are already yelling at their podcast app or their YouTube channel. I will also say, though, they're 29th in defense 3 games, which is probably not something they want to sustain either. But the Knicks are shooting almost 9 less threes a game than they were last year. And Karl Towns, for 3 games, is shooting 2 threes a game. And it's just going to be interesting to see how that manifests itself as the year goes along. Because yes, he's creating a ton of space for Jalen Brunson to get in the lane, and that is obviously a positive thing. But Dante DiVincenzo shot over 8 threes a game last year for the Knicks. He's shooting over 8 threes again, 8 threes a game again in Minnesota now. And that swing and 3-point shooting, it's just going to be an interesting thing to watch, because as we've talked about a bunch, this Knicks team is not going to be the best defensive team in the league. For them to be an elite team, their offense has to be right at the top of the league. And while it is through 3 games, they've lost a couple of the games, and the 3-point shooting is low, and it's going to be hard to be one of the top 3 or 4 offenses in the league if you're shooting under 33s a game in the current league.
How many total shots per game is Cat getting right now?
So right now he is 5th on the team in shots at 9 per game.
It needs to be
the 4 perimeter
That.
guys. Yeah, the other perimeter guys are all shooting double digits. Now, again, it's 3 games.
Yeah,
but it's early. But
it's 3
suspect
games.
that will balance itself out.
He just got there. I don't know. He might still be living in a hotel. Who knows? I'm not sure.
Hopefully he's not sleeping on an air mattress like DeAndre Ayton.
Well, listen, they have ice in New York City too. Hopefully he doesn't get iced in. But, you knew there was going to be a little bit of a transition, but he has played for Tibbs before. There should be some familiarity there. He has to be probably 2nd on the team in shots. And it's not just about, obviously, they're scoring points, but if you have Cat playing center, you've got to maximize his talents on the offensive end of the floor. And the other thing, this is true with even role-playing big men, but every big man almost who has ever walked the face of the earth is going to play harder for you on the defensive end if they feel like they're in the flow of things offensively. And I think that is especially true for big men who like making all-star games, have had 70-point games, have that kind of offensive talent.
The Cavs also went after him in the pick and roll. He was in drop coverage, and they just attacked him, getting downhill. He fouled out of the game. His 6th foul was a take foul, but he fouled out of the game, was in foul trouble. It's a tough situation with where they're at with their bigs. So they need him to be great offensively to mitigate that, and he can be. I believe he can be. It's just not happening yet.
And the Cavs are legitimately playing awesome basketball. We talked about the soft schedule early on, but this was to go in that building and get a win there. And look, the thing that we've talked about is the core 4 fit. And you just talked about the dynamic with Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland, and how it seems like Donovan is really making an emphasis on, doing his part to recognize when Garland's rolling and to, try to get him in a groove. And that's going to take pressure off Donovan, who had too much on his plate last year. We've also discussed a bunch. Do the two bigs really fit together? And I'll just give you the update. The play by pbpstats.com. With both of them on the floor, they've got a 13 plus 13.5 net rating. That's pretty dominant. Mobley only plus 30.7. Allen only plus 9.2. So they're kicking butt with all the combinations, but it's pretty difficult to say that, through a week of the season, that it's been an awkward fit when they're outscoring teams by almost 14 points per game with those guys together.
Listen, man, I'm going to say it again. NBA Cup.
Uh-oh.
East Group C. Celtics and Cavs are in the same group. Watch out for the NBA Cup group play C. I'm telling you, I think the Cavs could be a contender to win the NBA Cup. Okay, before we go, I just want to give a shout out and the best wishes to Utah Jazz forward Taylor Hendricks, who had a just terrible injury on Monday night, broken tibia and dislocated ankle. It's a terrible injury, non-contact. He slipped on the floor, fell awkwardly, and is out for the year. This is a lottery pick. Jazz are obviously in a rebuild, but this guy was part of the rebuild. His role was growing this year. Bummer. I know you spent some time around the Jazz, MacMahon. I don't know if you've gotten a chance to know him at all, but his teammates were devastated by this because he's so popular on the team.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, it's maybe the most gruesome injury that I've ever seen live. Like, it was very difficult.
I had a hard time. I haven't seen it yet. I had a hard time just listening to you describe it via text.
No,
I mean, man, I'm not going to go look at it. It was hard.
Don't look at the replay. It was such a freak injury, and then like I said, it just gruesome. And they were, Will Hardy was pretty emotional talking about it after the game. This is a 20-year-old kid who had a number 9 overall pick, had a tough rookie season, worked his butt off this summer, got bigger, got stronger, was doing everything that they were hoping he would do in terms of his development. Really good kid. And, at this point, the question is whether he can be back to start next season. Just a really, like a serious injury, is going to require surgery. It can be a long, tough rehab process. And, like you said, certainly everybody wishing him the best, and just, awful all the way around. Has to press pause on his development for a year, has to go through, the pain and just the psychological challenges of coming back from that type of thing.
Yeah, it's obviously awful anytime you see a guy get hurt like this. I mean, obviously the first thing you think of is another former Jazz player, Gordon Hayward, who had, it seems like, kind of a similar injury that Game Brian and I were both at.
Bontemps and I were there that night. Yeah.
But the thing that it's especially disappointing in this situation, beyond the obvious sympathies to Taylor over the injury, is for a Jazz team that's beginning truly a rebuild now. Like this year, the number one thing to come out of this year was going to be his development, and as their highest drafted prospect in this whole crew, like what he could look like this year. And you mentioned it, MacMahon, like he's earned himself some minutes. He's in the starting lineup. He's been guarding. I believe he was guarding Ja Morant some the other day.
No, he's guarding from Ja to Luka, like 1 through 4. He was going to take the toughest assignment every single night. And their belief is that he has a chance to be outstanding multi-positional defensive stopper. He was he was guarding Luka last night. He spent some time on Kyrie. That kind of defensive versatility at 6'10".
For sure. All right. Well, hopefully there'll be better news in the future for the Jazz, but it's going to be a tough season. Thanks for joining us here and watching and listening to the Hoop Collective. Thank you to Bontemps. Thank you to MacMahon. Thank you to Jackson, our producer. Thank you for watching and listening. We'll talk to you soon.
Adios, amigos.